You know, we have a number of different organized crime groups that operate in Canada, and there has been, over the years, the involvement of some Jamaican-based organized crime groups, including most recently Shower Posse, emerged as one of the sources of drugs and guns. It's not the only source of drugs and guns, you know, I want to be very clear on that, but that was an excellent example of how we were able to work with the Jamaican authorities to share criminal intelligence information and I hope to make both of our countries safer as a result of our work together. I mean, the nature of organized crime has changed quite significantly over the past few decades. There is no longer a respect for national borders, and because of the impact of social media and the internet, because of the globalization of certain crime trends, it is absolutely essential we work together, that we build relationships and that we have means of sharing criminal intelligence information. Organized crime groups that are based here, if they were involved, and I believe they were involved in supplying some drugs and guns to other jurisdictions, including Canada, the disruption and dismantling of those gangs here will make it safer in our country as well. And we saw, there was the investigation of the Shower Posse that we conducted in Toronto was not directly related to the operations here, but there were vulnerabilities created by the operations taking place in both countries, and the sharing of criminal information, criminal intelligence information that helps both Jamaican authorities and Canadian authorities do their work more effectively. The network was supplying guns and drugs to what we call street gangs in Toronto. These are street-level gangs, neighborhood-based gangs, usually involving young men between the ages of, say, 14 and 24, who are on the street selling drugs. And they are also in possession of handguns. And they use those guns to engage in violence related to the drug trade, but also violence against each other. And so we measure very carefully the results of all of our efforts to disrupt and dismantle those gangs, to limit the supply of drugs and to limit the supply of guns into our society by a reduction in violence. And we have seen, up until recently, we have seen immediately following the aftermath of the arrest of the dismantling of two street gangs in Toronto and the cutting off that pipeline that was being facilitated by the Shower Posse in Toronto, we saw a significant reduction in violence and in some of the street-level activity that was taking place. But unfortunately, new networks emerge, and you know they still can gain access to guns from the United States primarily. This is where most of the handguns that are on our streets come from, and so the violence it returns, and so we have to continue our vigilance. We have to keep on working hard at it. I think it's the one that is still resilient. You know, there were other posses that operated, Jamaican gangs that operated throughout the 1980s, but most of those have been dealt with through our criminal courts. Some of them simply left the country. Some of them, I think, just got older and stopped their criminal activity. Even what we found is the involvement of Shower Posse in Toronto was that they were not involved in the street-level trafficking of drugs. They were not involved in the violence that we were seeing. That's the street gangs that are doing that. And most of the people in those street gangs, they're born in Canada. They were born in our country. They go to our schools. But there was an older, more sophisticated, more well-established criminal organization, which we allege was responsible for bringing drugs into the country and for also acquiring some handguns, mostly from the United States, that they were making available to the street gangs. So they were the suppliers of the drugs being sold, but they weren't selling the drugs themselves on the street. And so it was a higher and more sophisticated level of organized crime that they're involved in. They've been around a long time, and they've established strong networks for the importation of drugs and for the criminal activity, and they conduct themselves in a way which shields them from traditional enforcement. We've done this for a number of years. We share criminal intelligence information between our two countries. As a matter of fact, for a number of years, the Jamaican Constabulary Force kept a senior police officer in Toronto working in my criminal intelligence branch, and I had a police officer from the Toronto Police Service working here in the JCF. We established some means of communicating and sharing criminal intelligence information that helps us both do our investigations. And we find in some investigations, and not all, but in some investigations, there's a clear connection between the organized crime activity here and the organized crime activity that's taking place in Canada. And the knowledge of, the shared knowledge of what is transpiring in each of our countries enables us to gather evidence. And we get great cooperation. I want to tell you that, because I have a number of gangs operating in Toronto that are engaged in violence, and sometimes the individuals involved in that violence will flee the country to avoid being arrested, and they will flee to Jamaica. But we have good cooperation from the JCF in helping to identify these people, and we've had a number of cases where we've been able to return some of those people to face justice in Canada, which I think is a very important thing. And just as importantly, we're able to provide information to the JCF about some people that are dangerous in our city. And if they're dangerous in our city, they're dangerous in your country. Because if they're willing to engage in violent activity in Canada, they're willing to engage in violent activity here. By sharing that information, the police can do the work of preventing some of that violence by dealing more appropriately with that individual, keeping an eye on him and prosecuting him if we find evidence of a crime.